Good morning, Bill.
Oh, I was on mute. There we go.
How are you?
Good. Good morning.
Morning.
You doing well?
Thank God. Thank God.
Hanukkah was good.
What's that?
Hanukkah was good for you.
Yeah. Yes,
Good.
indeed.
Moishe
Yes,
Pippa came and visited you.
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Moishe Pippa came and
Yeah,
visited you?
No, we don't. We at this point in our family, we don't do gifts except for the kids.
Right. Same here.
Yeah. So yeah, he skipped right over my house. It just cost me a fortune, but I get no presents in return.
Right. Exactly. But we're not supposed to look at it from that angle.
Right. It's as you get older, that's perfectly fine. Did you do anything for Thanksgiving?
Yeah. It was quiet. It was Lily and I, and let's see, my daughter, and let's see, one of her sons, and that was it. It was very quiet.
Sometimes those can be the
From
best
last year.
holidays. Yeah. Yeah, I went out to Phoenix and spent time with a lot of family. It was good. It's good. It's also good to come back to a little quiet.
Yeah, big change from last year's Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
Yeah, last year Thanksgiving, we went to Miami Beach to be with Lily's mother and one of her sons, and we ate in her backyard. We prepared Thanksgiving that we picked up at the grocery store.
Yep. Good morning, Eric. Welcome.
Good morning.
All right. So you're enjoying retirement, you told me, yes?
Yeah. So far, so good. Even with COVID getting in the way sometimes, we enjoyed it.
Have you picked up any new hobbies?
Well, I wouldn't say hobbies. It's actually, there's some that I would want to pursue, but I'm realizing that that when you're retired and your wife's retired, there's a lot you got to do together as opposed to separately.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So some of the hobbies are kind of on hold.
Got it. All right. You'll get there.
Yeah. Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Eric. And yourself?
Okay, thanks.
So you're retired. I don't know what
Yeah.
I retired, but I'm not retired. Now I'm just in business for myself. And I realize that it's been, let's see, 13 years that I'm
Really? That long?
semi-retired.
Bill, what do you do?
I'm a CPA. So I'm getting ready for this upcoming tax season.
Nice.
Getting ready to send out some updates and notices to my clients and get them ready. Make sure they have their information.
I mean, my wife's a CPA, and what little I know is that the law changes have been pretty brutal. That you have to contend with.
Yeah, well, it's always changing. So
yeah, but with COVID, it seems to have made it worse.
Well, it has in a way, because people have questions about the fact, like for the fact that they may be working out of their house. Can they take an office deduction? And of course they can't if they're an employee, and they don't like to hear that. So I have to tell them, have your employer reimburse you for your expenses if they can.
Mhm.
So you just
Makes
have to work
sense.
around things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So does she have a practice?
No, she sold it. So we were tempted to retire at the same time, though, because so much is involved in client retention. Last year in particular, she ended up working much more than she wanted to.
Right.
So she's definitely this year it's been a lot less, and she's very glad for that.
Yeah. It's a constant struggle to keep up with all the changes. I just took 3 days of seminars just to keep up with it and to earn my continuing education credits. So,
Right. Yeah, I never. It always gets me that your CPE is much more stringent for accountants than it is for lawyers.
that's right. It's 40 hours every year.
Yeah, 40 hours every year.
Morning, Marcia.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, good.
Good.
Checking out your books.
You have a lot to.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've gone through, the rabbi and I went through, and we purged our libraries a bit of about 500 or 600 books.
Whoa.
I'm gonna put them out on a table for congregants to come.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I think this end of the building was starting to droop because of the books.
Well, you know, Houston and foundation problems. Can't get away from it.
About one more minute and give people a few seconds to sign on. Hello, Diane. It's still morning out there. Good morning.
Yeah. Still muted.
We're muted. Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, it looks like the sun's out.
Yeah. It's always out in California.
Even in the north, I thought it was pretty cloudy up there.
Yesterday was, and we're getting a huge rainstorm on Sunday. So they say, but we can use it.
Yeah, for sure. And when we hear the word rainstorm, we all panic.
No, I know.
The fires are all under control.
Yeah, there are no fires this year really big, but in yesterday's paper, they arrested a father and a son who actually started one of the fires last year that burnt for months. So that it's just, you know, they keep blaming it on climate change, but here you've got two individuals that started it. It's really sad.
They're the climate.
Yeah.
All right, my friends, we're gonna get started.
The power systems up there, that they've started fires just accidentally,
Hmm?
because
Pardon me?
the electrical systems up there, that they've started fires because,
Well, that's, yeah, they're blaming PG&E, but here they just arrested 2 people.
yeah.
All right. Schmatte business. Welcome to the Schmatte business. So we talked about the German Jews who preceded the Russians to America. The German Jews had already established themselves in the garment manufacturing businesses before the Russian Jews arrived. And so it's a natural for newcomers with garment making experience They gravitate that direction in America, but a large number of the unskilled new arrivals also ended up going there as well. So it became a place for the all skilled or not. Quite simply, many European immigrants found that the only jobs that were available to them were in the garment factories that were created by their predecessors. And so it was an opportunity. The word factory by itself is also is a misnomer, because some factories were nothing more than sectioned off rooms in walk-up tenements, but and others considered large buildings packed with employees. Cold in winter, hot in summer, these factories were noisy, they were dirty, they were unhealthy. Closed windows kept out fresh air, and as a result, many workers developed lifelong sicknesses, including tuberculosis. Now, if you keep in mind that they came here to this country with a vision of streets paved with gold, what they discovered instead was dirty, crowded roads to grimy sweatshops.
What year are we talking?
What's that?
What year are we talking about?
We're talking about the 1890s, 1900, not that time frame. All right. And so they toiled in miserable conditions to keep their families alive. And yet at first they were afraid. They were afraid to complain because they felt fortunate just to have a job of any kind. So let's talk about Jewish roles in responding to this. Over time, the tradition of social activism that new workers brought with them led them, Jews in particular, to the country's fledgling labor unions. And in 1888, the United Hebrew Trades joined together a number of small Jewish unions to bolster their positions during strikes. In strength, there is unity was the slogan that led to the founding of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. I remember all the commercials growing up. Look for the union label, whatever it was. I don't remember the melody. It stuck in my head somehow, right? By 1909, the downtrodden workers, mostly young Jewish women, would no longer tolerate these terrible working conditions, and a strike began with one factory and quickly spread to include nearly every shirtwaist factory in the city of New York. Day after day, strikers picketed their factories and fought to keep workers from entering. They faced violence. The police did little to prevent any of the violence. Gangs were hired by the factory owners to intimidate the picketers. Many strikers were hurt, but the picketing continued until the strike was settled in February of 1910 with an agreement on a shorter work week. And I'm always fascinated by the fact that everybody assumes, well, 40 hours, that's a work week. Who said so? All right. The reality of it is it's an outcome of these kinds of strikes. At 40 hours a week, first of all, if you're in the professional world, that's a misnomer. If you're in the Jewish professional world, it's completely, it's a fiction. Total fiction. Part-time work is 40 hours a week. Now, what do you do for a living? Right. Union solidarity had held at this point, and the strike, the uprising, as they called it, the uprising of the 20,000, changed the role of women and Jews in American labor politics. Later that same year, 2010, there was a larger strike of 60,000, mainly male cloak makers, known as the Great Revolt, and it nearly shut down the American garment industry. The leaders of the American Jewish community were concerned. They're concerned by the bitter confrontation between the Jewish bosses and the Jewish workers. Again, we're talking about uptowners and downtowners here. Boston lawyer, you may have heard of him, Louis Brandeis, later to go on become the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, works out a settlement. A year later, in 1911, on March 25th, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company put a human face on this issue. 146 workers, mostly young Jewish and Italian women, died. They died because of locked doors, lack of fire extinguishing resources, and an indoor fire escape that was useless when they needed it. The fire department arrived quickly, but they were unable to stop the flames because their ladders were only long enough to reach as high as the 7th floor, and the factories were on the 8th to 10th floors. The fallen bodies, the falling victims made it difficult for the fire department to approach the building because people were jumping to their deaths. A large crowd of bystanders gathered on the street, witnessing 62 people who jumped or fell to their death from the burning building. Lewis Waldman, later a New York State Assemblyman, described the scene years later. Bill, do you have reading number 1?
Mute here, okay.
Please.
One Saturday afternoon in March of that year, March 25 to be precise, I was sitting at one of the reading tables in the old Astor Library. It was a raw, unpleasant day, and the comfortable reading room seemed a delightful place to spend the remaining few hours until the library closed. I was deeply engrossed in my book when I became aware of fire engines racing past the building. By this time, I was sufficiently Americanized to be fascinated by the sound of fire engines. Along with several others in the library, I ran out to see what was happening and following crowds of people to the scene of the fire. A few blocks away, the Osh building at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street was ablaze. When we arrived at the scene, the police had thrown up a cordon around the area and the firemen were helplessly fighting the blaze. The 8th, 9th, and 10th stories of the building were now an enormous roaring cornice of flames. Word had spread through the east side by some magic of terror that the plant of the Triangle Waste Company was on fire and that several hundred workers were trapped. Horrified and helpless, the crowds, I among them, looked up at the burning building, saw girl after girl appear at the reddened windows, paused for a terrified moment, and then leaped to the pavement below to land as mangled, bloody pulp. This went on for what seemed a ghastly eternity. Occasionally, a girl who had hesitated too long was licked by pursuing flames and screaming with clothing and hair ablaze, plunged like a living torch to the street. Life nets held by the firemen were torn by the impact of the falling bodies. The emotions of the crowd were indescribable. Women were hysterical. Scores fainted. Men wept, as in paroxysms of frenzy. They hurled themselves against the police lines.
And what you've got as a result of this is a national outrage, energizing unions and leading to state and national legislation to improve the safety of American workers. What I'm emphasizing here, and we'll shift topics, is essentially the Jewish experience, because this was the Jewish world, was the garment industry, as well as Jewish ownership. And as a result, Jews were highly involved in the labor unions as a response. All right, comments on any of that? Topic shift. All right. For the people of the book, education, education, education became the mantra of pulling oneself out of these ghettos. Arriving, as most of the people did, as we talked about, with no trade or profession, the first step out of poverty was often vocational training tinged with a touch of Americanism. Organizations founded and they funded, that were founded and funded by uptown Jews, offered a variety of training programs. However, this was not necessarily universally accepted by everyone because they were Yiddish speakers and the courses were deliberately being taught in English to Americanize the people. Many immigrant parents, nonetheless, quickly realized that while they were limited by cultural, linguistic, educational handicaps of the New World. For their children, nothing would be impossible. And the route out of the Lower East Side was education. And for the children of immigrants, enrolling in New York City's public schools began that journey. By 1908, when Jews were about 2% of the population, they made up nearly 8.5% of college students, including 13% of law school students and 6% in dental school. So you can see this emphasis on education in the Jews very early in process. Author Mary Anton neatly summed up education's strong appeal for immigrants that were desperate to transcend this process through their children, the crushing realities of their lives. And that's reading number 2. Eric, you've got square number 2.
If education, culture, and the higher life were shining things to be worshipped from afar, he had still a means left whereby he could draw one step nearer to them. He could send his children to school to learn all those things that he knew by fame to be desirable. The common school, at least, perhaps high school, but 1 or 2, perhaps even college. His children should be students, should fill his house with books and intellectual company, and thus he would walk by proxy in the fields of liberal learning. As for the children themselves, he knew no sure way to their advancement and happiness.
Yeah, and this has to sound familiar to many of us. My parents they attended college, they didn't graduate college, but it was clear to my brother, to me, that that was our journey. It wasn't even put up for discussion. You know, it's a matter of how many degrees you're going to get, not are you getting a degree. And so education was the surface. I went looking a bit to look at the experience of immigration, and I found online some very interesting information. So generally, the first generation of an immigrant group is by nature bipolar. They've got one foot still in the cultural memory of the old country, and the other a foothold in the strange society with unfamiliar customs and an unrecognizable language. And so that generation, by definition, needed to be bipolar. What I found online is reading number 3, and I apologize in advance. There's a lot of readings today, but I think sometimes it's better to go to the sources that I've been able to find to create the feeling. And what I want to look at here, it's from nettherapy.com. Psychologically, what is the experience as a general rule, an overview of immigration? All right, so Marcia, you've got the 3rd square. I'm going to ask you to read through number 1, the beginning through honeymoon phase, and then Diane, you've got 2, 3, and Amy, you'll take 4.
Okay,
Okay, go.
number 1, honeymoon phase.
Well,
Most
first
people-
start with the stages of immigration at the top.
Okay, sorry, reading number 3, the stages of immigration. The stages of immigration have been extensively written about, and the usual beginning point is to talk about the culture shock which occurs after immigration. This culture shock follows on directly as a result of changes which occur to one's value systems, to the new ideas in one's new country. The term culture shock was coined by Calvero Oberg in a 1954 report published by Bobbs Merrill, in which 5 distinct stages of culture shock were identified. All people experience the same feelings of strangeness when traveling to or living in another country. And this process has a cause, symptoms, and resolution.
So just as a note, he describes 5 distinct stages and then only gives you 4, but let's go through the 4.
Maybe he leaves it up to you to think
Yeah,
of.
go ahead.
Okay, number 1, honeymoon phase. Most people begin with great expectations and a positive mindset. There is excitement, new sights, new smells, new tastes, and the early problems are experienced as quaint, as part of the newness. Anything new is intriguing and exciting. And anyway, there are more pressing problems to deal with, like opening bank accounts, getting driver's license, finding schools, doctors, dentists, gynecologists. I doubt that then, but these are usually handled with the accompanying euphoria of having overcome each of these first hurdles successfully.
Okay, thank you.
Rejection phase. The honeymoon phase comes to an end as the newcomer has to deal with transportation problems, shopping problems, or communication problems. Little things come up, but it may start to seem like people somehow no longer care about your problems. They may help, but they don't seem to understand your concern over what they see as small problems. You might even start to think that the people in your new country don't like newcomers, and often you may begin to feel aggressive and start to complain about the new culture country. This phase is a crisis phase in the disease of culture shock, and is called the rejection phase, precisely because it is at this point that the newcomer starts to reject the host country, complaining about and noticing only the bad things that bother them. Manual read number 3.
Okay.
I had to pay for this, by the way. Regression phase. If you have struggled with phase 2, you may find yourself moving into regression, moving backward. And in this phase of culture shock, you spend much of your time speaking your own language, watching videos from your home country, eating food from home. You may also notice that you are moving in social circles which are exclusively made up of people from your own background, and you don't want to meet locals. You may spend most of this time complaining about the new country/culture and its strange and senseless ways. Also, in the regression phase, you may only remember the good things about your home country, which may suddenly seem marvelously wonderful. All the difficulties that you had there are forgotten, and you may find yourself wondering why you ever left. You may now only remember your home country as a wonderful place in which nothing ever went wrong for you.
Yeah. Okay. Number 4.
Recovery phase, or at ease at last phase. In this stage, you become more comfortable with the language, and you also feel more comfortable with the customs of your new country. You can now move around without a feeling of anxiety. You still have problems with some of the social cues, and you may still not understand everything people say, especially idioms, or do. However, you are now much better adjusted to the new culture, and you start to realize that no country is that much better than another. It is just different lifestyles, different ways to deal with the problems of life. With this new adjustment, you accept the food, drinks, habits, and customs of the new country, and you may even find yourself preferring some things in the new country to things at home. You have now understood that there are different ways to live your life, and that no way is really better than another, just different. Finally, you have become familiar in the new place. It's not so bad. Most importantly, your sense of humor will have returned, and you find you are able to look at yourself and laugh.
So that's terrific.
Yeah, I thought so too. I'm seeing a number of heads shaking. It really is an accurate description of the struggles and the process with which people go through. You know, yeah, I've seen Russian Jews who've come here to America and had this experience in recent years. Israelis have come here. You see similar. I had a friend who came here from South Africa, and ultimately he never got to stage 4. He just decided, I can't live here, and he moved to Australia. Okay. What his issues were, I don't know, but it is not an easy transition. And he would describe that the value systems were simply different. It didn't work for him. Anybody other comments?
No, it's
All
just
right,
very
well,
true.
Yeah, I think the at ease phase, I just want to add that a lot of that may come from over time with the children of the immigrants adjusting.
Yep.
And the children basically help them to integrate that much more because they themselves are now Americanized.
Yep, I think you're right.
So I definitely think they went through this, but for the immigrants coming from Eastern Europe and down to the Lower East Side, yeah, the children were the mechanism that they got acculturated with, obviously.
Mhm.
And I don't know how many of them really thought it was that much better back in the old country.
It probably depended on the individual experience, but you're right. For many of them, when you're coming from, it's a little bit different than it might be coming from in other areas of when you're leaving because of economics versus leaving because not only the economics bad, but you're also being pursued by Cossacks. It might not be 100% accurate.
Right,
Yeah, I think,
and that's true for some of the immigrants, say from Afghanistan right now.
Yeah,
The refugees coming in, they can't. I'm sure they're going to miss their country, but they
Well,
can't.
but I would still say, Eric, go ahead.
Go ahead.
no, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm saying for Jews as opposed to other immigrant groups, I think they were immigrating for keeps. I
Yeah,
mean, there wasn't any going back, like a lot of Italians, Eastern Europeans, there was a lot of people did go back. You know,
You're 100% right.
we
Or if
didn't
they
have
went
that-
back,
you
they
really
went
didn't
back-
have that option.
they went back to visit and take,
No, but I mean, they actually went back to live. Like,
no, I
you
know,
talk
I'm
about
saying,
Sicilian immigrants going back to
Yeah,
Sicily.
many of the immigrants from other countries are basically raising money to go back or to survive. Once the
Right.
drought is over, they return. That was not the Jewish
no,
response.
no, they knew they weren't going back except, if they were financially able, like my grandfather, they went back to visit.
Right.
And,
So-
and bring, but,
No, go ahead.
yeah, I definitely agree that some of these stages, and my grandfather never was comfortable in English.
So let me just point out that even though they may have been fleeing the Cossacks, that doesn't mean they didn't pine for the culture and the community that they had left and the value systems that they had experienced in their former countries. The physical threat, yes, but that doesn't mean that the value system and the way of life wasn't something they echoed back on and really missed greatly. Okay, so these new arrivals try to transplant their European culture onto American soil. Yiddish culture flourishes for a time. There's a large array of Yiddish newspapers, theatrical productions, and they nurture the memories of the old country with a sort of American twist to them. And guiding them through this, just as Eric and Urona said, guiding them through the maze of their everyday life were their children, who are being raised in a public school system as absorbent sponges of American life and language. As a result, by the second generation, those children who have been born here in America had thrown off Yiddish and the traditional religious practices of their parents. They weren't necessarily abandoning Judaism, but they were developing new ways of expressing themselves as Jews in English-speaking multicultural America. They could still speak Yiddish with their parents, but their native tongue was English. This is my mom, making them linguistically indistinguishable from other Americans. My mom had no accent whatsoever in English, but the minute you put her in a room with her mom or her grandparents, the Yiddish flowed because that's what she grew up with. It just flowed out of her.
I had the same thing with my father. It was the same thing. He came here when he was 10 and he spoke Yiddish with his parents and of course, but had no accent in English.
Yeah, and my mom didn't speak a word of English until she went to school.
And I'm sure my mother was second generation, but I'm first generation on my father's side. And I know this must be the same for many people. They discouraged us from learning Yiddish. That was how they told their secrets.
Right.
They didn't want us to
Yeah,
understand.
exactly. I'll just share very quickly and I'm going to go on. I took a year of German in high school because I wanted to at least be able to understand some of what was going on. And I discovered that it was the easiest class I've ever taken because I knew so many words that I didn't even realize I knew.
Right.
All right. I'm sitting there, I got a German Club award. Well, I didn't deserve it. I knew the language up front. All right. Let's talk a little bit about religious life. Most of the newcomers learn to adapt their religious lives to fit living here in America. Survival depended on work. We've talked about this. And with Sunday being a legal day of rest and all commerce prohibited, many bread workers were then working on Saturdays, particularly if they had to bring their families to this country. This was particularly true of the early immigrants, as I said, who brought their families here. By the mid-1880s, Eastern European Orthodox Jews were now the new majority in New York City. They had taken over in terms of numbers, and they did seek to recreate a European model of religious community. Among other factors, they were concerned about the varying standards of kashrut that seemed to result from a lack of central authority to supervise the process, including the ritual slaughterers. Excuse me. Furthermore, there was no universally accepted Beit Din, no court, Jewish court, So every synagogue as a result, and we take this for granted, they didn't, was free to set its own standards and practices. Imagine the chutzpah. Synagogues think they can have their own religious decisions. All right. In America, in contrast to Europe, the power of the congregational lay leaders was trumping the scholarship, the piety, and the authority of rabbis. That is new. It's a cultural change. With the main goal of bringing the newcomer solidly into the larger society of American Jewry, the established Jewish community, however, could not ignore the importance of religion. Children of immigrants did not feel at home, unfortunately, in the Yiddish-speaking old world, but many of them also were not comfortable with what was to them alien, this reform concept of Judaism in America. We're talking about the 1880s. And there was a fear that these two extremes were going to drive the children of immigrants from Judaism completely, if those were the only two choices. Indeed, you have during this period the appearance of Christian missionaries on the Lower East Side, all right, who made that fear immediate, although their success was somewhat limited. The Jews weren't necessarily buying into Christianity at the time. As if on command, a middle road to Jewish religious observance appears. Its roots were established in 1883 at a banquet, which marked the first graduation of American-trained Reform rabbis from Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. The menu was varied and to many in attendance, shocking. Shrimp, crab meat were followed by meat and ice cream. All right, and I've given you reading number 4. I'm not going to have anybody read this because there's a lot of foreign words, and we're not. I'm going to just tell you to take about 30 seconds and look at the menu.
Look at the menu. The menu. The fish, entree, crab, shrimp, cream, milk. What?
And then after all the meat, ice cream right away.
Right, right.
Very upper class menu too.
Yes, it is.
Very,
Right, with lots of French thrown in.
A lot of French.
Yeah.
So this is at a time in which the reform movement is struggling between its liberal wing and its traditional wing. And the result is there are bewildered guests who leave the room in disgust. Others sit there stunned, not daring to touch the food in front of them. The liberals of the reform movement had made their point. There was no place in their vision for those who wanted to hold on to old traditions such as kashrut. This became known as the Tref Banquet, and it directly triggered the development of conservative Judaism. The ascendant liberal wing of the reform movement was institutionalized in their views put forth in the Pittsburgh platform 2 years later in 1885. One other more traditional rabbis within the movement withdrew, and they withdrew to form the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York. Interestingly, because there was no conservative movement, it's a group of wealthy Reform traditional Jews who invigorate this struggling small seminary with sizable contributions for the training of American rabbis. And as a result, the conservative movement is unique. It's unique in that the first element that arises of the movement is the rabbinical school. It's not the congregations. It's not any other element. It is the school that, and as a result, the titular head of the movement has always been the head of the seminary, the chancellor. That is unique. This American-born Judaism, because Reform Judaism came out of Europe, Orthodoxy has a lot longer history. This American-born Judaism offered a new generation of children of Yiddish-speaking parents a way to preserve religious heritage without doing away with the familiar traditions of halakha, as the Reform movement seems to have done at the time. All right. We now have a bunch of readings. I want you to, one is about Solomon Schechter, just to give you a sense of the conservative movement, where it came from. And then there are readings about the immigration experience and what it was like in America that I want to go through. All right. I see Sandra's on the phone. So Rona, if you would start with Solomon Schechter. You need to unmute. There you go.
Solomon Schechter, a child prodigy who became a noted rabbinic scholar and historian, Schechter was born in Romania in 1847. During his studies at the University of Vienna, he formed his own vision of a Catholic Israel, embracing all Jews and consensus religious practice. In 1890, he became a lecturer at Cambridge University, where his responsibilities included maintaining the university libraries of Hebrew manuscript collection. His reputation as a scholar grew when his discovery of ancient manuscript fragments in a Kairos synagogue Geniza led to the new understandings of the development of Jewish tradition. From 1902 until his death in 1915, Schechter left the presidency of the fledgling Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, held the presidency in New York. Under his leadership, the seminary developed into a major institution of scholarship in the conservative movement in America, and in America was recognized and rejuvenated.
Okay. Schechter, in a sense, is a key figure in the development of the conservative movement. His wife was greatly involved. If you go to the seminary and you go and you live in the dorms, as I did, many of us lived in the Matilda Schechter dormitory, the major influence. I would invite you to read some of his writings. I'm going to tell you in advance, they're very dense. You will sit with a dictionary and you will sit there for hours getting through the first 3 or 4 pages, and then you go to page 4. All right, it's dense reading, but it's good stuff. All right, let's look at the shtetl world. All right, Sandra, you've got reading number 6. Welcome back. You're on mute.
Muted, yeah.
There you go.
All right, 6, the American shtetl. Rates of Eastern European Jews were extricated from their impoverishment in the small Jewish shtetls of Eastern Europe that were made universally known and glamorized by Fiddler on the Roof. Many immigrants were taken out by European and American Jewish philanthropists and settled in various areas of the United States, where they were expected to establish farming communities regardless of whether or not they had been farmers in the old country. Other groups banded together in the small towns and cities of America, where they retained their shtetl mentality. The American shtetl essentially was a clone of the Eastern European one, heavily dependent on religion for its character, its social life, and above all, its cohesiveness. While they lasted, they were as vibrant and colorful as Tevye's shtetl. Who wrote that?
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Reading number 7. Let's see, Bill, you're back up.
Okay. Molly Kravitz Greenblatt. Molly, who was born in one of New Jersey farming communities, 1893, remembered that it was a very, very tight unit. Everyone knew everyone else. It was like a big family when there was trouble. They all tried to console if there was one person troubled. When there was happiness or happy occasions, everyone was happy. The synagogue was the focal point. Each person was a free person to do what he pleased as long as he didn't hurt anybody else. If there was someone who needed to be reminded that he should do the right thing, they told him.
Yeah, they were clear about that. Reading number 8, Eric, you've got the first half, and Marcia, if you'll take the second half.
Okay. Leo Leveau, retired farmer, Roosevelt, New Jersey. I used to be a farmer here in this community. I was born in the United States. My parents came from Russia, and they always had a dream of having an independent life on the farm. I always wanted to be my own boss, not responsible to anybody, and not have anyone tell me what to do. I went to an agricultural school in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, after I graduated from high school. I couldn't afford to go to college, and there was a chance to get some kind of a college education free. It was called the National Farm School at the time. Almost all were Jewish students at the time. The school was established by a Dr. Krauskopf, and he was a rabbi. He felt that if they were a part of the landed community, they would be accepted by the rest of the population. But in order to be a farmer, you had to know how to farm. So he established the school.
Okay, Marcia?
Unfortunately, I could not make it work in the farm world. My mother-in-law noted an item in the Jewish press that there was going to be a community built by the government to establish a project for the needle trade workers in New Jersey. The people in this area didn't like the idea of a Jewish community here at all. They called us Bolsheviks and Reds and Pinkos and whatnot. Hightstown was noted in the early days for its conservatism and its Ku Klux Klan. Here's a Jewish community being set up under their noses, and they certainly didn't like it. But after a while, when we became a little wealthier, we began to do business in Hightstown. We shopped there and we used the bank there. So they accepted us, grudgingly perhaps, but they accepted us. After a while, we established pretty good relationships. Also, our children went to the high school in Hightstown, and our children were bright children and went to some of the best colleges in the country. It didn't make friends for us, but we survived all this, and we finally made a place for ourselves here.
Okay, reading number 9 is Diana Manny.
Helen Barth. What am I on? Okay. In 1936, we moved to Roosevelt, then called Jersey Homesteads. My parents were required to make a $500 cash deposit as a share in the community. In return, they got a share in the cooperative, a share in the factory, a share in the retail store, a share in the grocery store, a share in whatever this community was supposed to have been. The town was basically set up to provide industry. There was to have been a garment factory with a retail outlet. The factory was to make ladies' coats and suits. My father's specialty was pockets.
That's specialization.
Yeah.
Benjamin Brown conceived the idea of the community. He owned property nearby, and he was a money man. He was an entrepreneur, and he had a vision, and he convinced the government they should subsidize it. I understand that Eleanor Roosevelt, for whatever reason, was very supportive of the project. I believe Brown was a socialist and wanted something like a moshav in Israel today, not like the kibbutz, but more like the moshav, because you own your home and you live in your home and you farm, yet you work in the cooperative factory.
Every little house like ours had a half acre. And my father, who lived in the Bronx and in a shtetl as a boy in Poland, had a garden every year until 2 years before he died. He gardened every year, and they canned tomatoes in the heat of the summer and made tomato juice and did these wonderful things that I recollect. I remember the community as family. There were as many meetings and as many organizations as there were people, and everyone was involved, and yet everybody was family. Times were hard, but we never felt that we were poor. Our family never had a car. There may have been a half dozen cars in town, and we would hitchhike into Hightstown, where all the services were: the kosher butcher, the food store, the movie theater Saturday afternoons.
There was a synagogue. Originally, I'm not sure where the synagogue met, but I know that prior to World War II, there was something like a construction shack. It looked like an army barracks. Ultimately, about 1955 or so, they built another very fancy synagogue on another street. So this community, which is now a mixed community, has a synagogue. We don't have a church, but we do have a synagogue.
Most everyone went to shul on the high holidays. My parents didn't impose that on me personally. I have my grandmother's Shabbos candlesticks, but I don't bench lift Friday night. Christmas didn't exist. It just didn't exist. As far as I'm concerned, it still doesn't exist.
My brother went to Hebrew school. Although there was an Orthodox synagogue in town, my parents did not conduct themselves in an Orthodox manner and felt that I would benefit more from a Yiddish culture experience than to Hebrew school. The foreword was delivered here and the tag, but my father's preference was the foreword. Some people were very frugal. After one person read the foreword, they would trade with someone who got the tag.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Tag means day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, tag is good.
A unique feature of our community is that we have free burial. Anyone who is a resident of our community can be buried in the community. If one has lived here for 25 years, they have a right to free burial in the community. Unmarried children of residents can be buried here two probably. It's a municipal cemetery with a very large Jewish section.
One more.
Take it, Diane.
Okay. What about the charge of communism? That the surrounding people thought this was a communistic society. It was very strange. Here was a group of people who came and spoke with accents, who voted straight Democrat. As I said, the Ku Klux Klan was in Allentown. Hightstown had always been a Republican community. What else would they think?
Thank
You know,
you.
I just want to add, we lived in New Jersey for 13 years. In fact, that's Vicky was raised in New Jersey. And when we got there, you also, when we got there, we're from California. We are totally assimilated here. You look for where the Jews lived. So we went to an area called White Meadow Lake, which was a summer community made into a winter all-around community. But you didn't go to Mountain Lakes because Mountain Lakes was not Jewish. You went to White Meadow Lake. The only thing there was the synagogue, White Meadow Temple, and that's even when we went down to Freehold because that's where Jews lived. You didn't go, or you go to Lakeview. It's really so different. And I don't know how Houston is. I know you've got,
Meyerland. We have sort of a Jewish corridor, but there are Jews around in pockets elsewhere for sure. But the corridor really is the central place of Jewish life.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. So you can go back and read 10, 11, and 12 later, just for brevity's purposes. We're going to jump to 13. And Amy, I'm going to ask you to read number 13, Jack Press.
Jack H. Press. My mother's father and mother came from that old Vilna area where most of the Jews of Burlington came from, because Burlington originally was a hotbed of Litvaks. Galvanizers
The
weren't
Litzianers.
weren't too readily accepted in this town, but after war, of course, they filtered in here. Now the derivations were forgotten, but it was a strong Litvak community, very strong. Everybody had the same accent in Yiddish naturally. What made it a shtetl? Well, because we were basically a little Jewish village. Everybody lived together. Everybody was fairly poor. Basically, there were a few professionals. They were all working people. Some were cattle dealers, a few storekeepers and butchers and so forth. Living so close together, everybody knew each other. Because the tradition of Orthodoxy came with them from Russia, they more or less extended it here. And God help you if you weren't really Orthodox. You were a goy. You were no good. If you didn't go to shul, you were a goy. Of course, we all went to the same Hebrew school. We all played together. There were a few little cliques among us, but we weren't divided in the day school by money. We were divided by likes and dislikes. We all did the same things. Burlington was known for the various names, either by trade styles or by derogatory names. You had Cohen the butcher, Cohen from Bergines.
Bergani's right.
You had Kirshner the short, Kirshner the tall. You had derogatory names. You had one who was called the Bartzer. He was known for that.
Okay.
Are we talking about Burlington, Vermont?
Burlington, Vermont, or New Jersey? Yeah.
New Jersey.
Oh, okay, I wondered. Okay.
Yeah, New Jersey. All
So
right.
it's still New Jersey. Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the ways people got their last names. The likelihood of someone whose last name is Miller, you have a sense of what their family history was.
Or Schneider, they were Taylors.
Schneider or Taylor or even Taylor, right?
Yeah.
Schneider, Taylor, right? All right, reading number 14. Sandra, you're up.
14, Arthur Bloomberg. We had teachers who could not talk English, so we were a Yiddish community. Everybody was kosher then. If you were found not to be kosher, you were on the S list. You didn't count. You almost got thrown out of the synagogue. We were limited in the amount of kosher foods we had. A couple of Jewish butchers, and then we had Colonies Market, where we used to get the processed meats and stuff from New York, Hebrew National. We had a Jewish bakery, so we got our bread there. We didn't buy anything in the so-called Goyish stores, nothing except maybe sugar and coffee and stuff like that. We used to have a lot of anti-Semitism. In the wintertime, we had to walk to the high school in groups to protect ourselves, to work together in a snowball fight. I have a friend of mine who said once, quote, if you scratch a Goy, you find an anti-Semite, unquote. Having grown up next to Catholic school, I learned that the first paragraph in their catechism at that time was that the Jews killed Christ.
Do we have an approximate date on this reading?
Or where he's from?
Yeah,
I have to go back and look to see where I got them. It's I have a book that's all
on immigrant experience.
yeah, all immigrant experiences. I'll have to go back and find it. Last one, we'll do 15. We'll skip 16. 15. All right. So Rona, if you would do that.
Okay. Marshall G. London. It was a ghetto without the external forces. Forces to hold the people together were all transmitted from Europe to here with a little influence of America. In such a small community, there was a lot of social pressure not to break through the lines and the rules of the ghetto. So for a boy to date a non-Jewish girl, which would be a little ahead of my time, was, my God, the talk of the community. For someone to move to the WASP area of town, my God, that was forbidden. Or to try and join the country club or swim in a certain
Area.
that was restricted. This news got around pretty fast. Let's see, 15. Sorry, I'm looking for my page with 16.
This next sentence is missing a few words. You didn't do things you were not supposed to do on
Oh,
the
yeah,
Shabbat.
yeah, I've got it. You didn't do things you weren't supposed to do on Shabbos. They stretched it a little so that when I was a child after shul, they would give us a few coins to go to the movies on Saturday afternoon. My mother used to talk about Saturday afternoon in the movies
Mhm.
in Brooklyn. We were talking about the late 1930s. Yeah, that would fit. The Seder, the traditional Seder, the traditional foods, going with my grandmother to the Schochet to see a chicken, ritually slaughtered, influenced me a great deal as a young boy. And I'm talking about when I was 7, 8 years old. The warmth around the table and the guests that would come, the university students they would bring down for meals and holidays, the warmth that exuded from the family left a great impression on me. I'm just going to interject that growing up in Brooklyn and not, as a Jew, not educated Jewishly, but that's the sense I would say.
Yeah, so I really wanted to stop at this point and go around the room. I'd ask no one to take more than a minute or two so that everybody has a chance to speak. How much of this echoes for you?
This, other than that, they were living in a more rural area than, the city of New York. Yeah.
Okay, Manny?
But both my parents came from Poland when they met here, but they came from Poland. They were like 20 years old. So I'm first generation. And, I think being first generation, you really do, whoops. Hold on, excuse me. I'll get rid of it.
Avon.
Anyway, being first generation, an awful lot sticks to you from your parents.
Yeah. Anybody else or any other echoes?
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn. It was not an Orthodox neighborhood. It was Bensonhurst. It was
That's where I grew up.
We'll have to have that conversation. It was Jews. It was Jews.
My mother lived in Bensonhurst.
Really? We can get into streets anyway.
West 6th Street.
And it was a Jewish and Italian mixed
Exactly.
neighborhood.
Exactly.
Yeah, there were hardly any Protestants, like in my sixth grade class of 35 students in a public school, there were 32 Jews, 3 Catholics, and 1 Protestant. He was there because his mom taught at the school. But he was the
That was
big
my elementary-
outsider.
That was
So
my
it's-
elementary school, and I didn't
So-
know anything existed but Catholicism.
Yeah,
thought-
right.
I thought that was it. Yeah.
And I mean, I remember, and I went with my mother to the kosher butcher and all that, but otherwise, yeah, there were lots of Jewish storekeepers, but there was the Chinese laundry. I mean, it was mixed. And I grew up in a kosher home. I remember Yom Kippur being very dark in the house, no lights. Anyway, I could go on and on,
Yeah.
but yeah, a lot of these things obviously resonate with me.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
I grew up in Bensonhurst also, and I didn't know there was a Syrian Jewish community there in those years that I was growing up. But definitely family. I mean, in a 1-bedroom apartment till we moved to Sheepshead Bay, to the co-ops, in that living room, Passover, Seders, the table went from one end to the other, and my grandfather and my father conducted the Seder all in Hebrew, didn't know what was going on. As quickly as they could to get through to the meal, but it was all about family.
Yep.
Being
Yeah.
Jewish was about family and your neighborhood. I do have memories of decorating a Christmas tree and loving it because I had one Catholic friend, my
Same here.
non-Jewish friend.
Eric?
So, yeah.
I'm thinking back to the Passover Seders that we had at my grandmother's house. And I can't help thinking I was too young to appreciate it.
Hmm.
I was too darn young.
Yep.
Because boy, do I miss that now.
Yeah, I have a vague memory in the back of my head of my great grandfather sitting at the head of the table and just mumbling through the Hebrew.
We used to call it speed reading.
Yes.
Speed reading the Hebrew because people were hungry.
It was
Yeah.
completely foreign to me. I had no idea what was going on.
Was it a Maxwell House Haggadah?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Yes.
And,
indeed.
and honestly, when we moved to Texas, it was very hard because we had no family. We had some distant cousins in Dallas.
That's the experience of
No,
moving
it was-
away.
Yeah, and you were like having to create a new community and
Yeah.
a new, and I still do that. I still have to just invite friends and for Passover.
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's-
indeed. All right, my friends, I think that's where we're going to stop for today. All right, we'll continue on next week. I thank you. These
you.
immigrant stories are fascinating. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you
A
tomorrow
good
night.
day.
You
You
Good
too.
night.
Thanks again.